Lauren arrived in Ravennia at dawn, when the mist still embraced the cobblestone streets, and the lake reflected the first golden hues of the sun. The city, known for its charm untouched by time, seemed suspended between the past and the present. Ancient buildings, with their wrought iron balconies and ornate stained glass windows, told stories that few still remembered. The journey had not been just a professional commitment, but an inexplicable calling. The manuscript that had brought her there was a rare artifact, found in an old mansion by the lake, an abandoned property whose dusty windows had witnessed generations pass by unhurriedly. The document, written in faded ink on yellowed pages, carried enigmatic passages, fragments of a past intertwined with the local legend of the Whispering Bridge. The bridge was more than a historical landmark. It was said that, over the centuries, lovers had whispered promises beneath its sculpted stone structure, believing that such vows would seal their destinies. Some claimed that the bonds formed there could never be broken, while others whispered tales of doomed romances, tragically consumed by an invisible force. The mansion where the manuscript had been found exuded an air of mystery. Its interior, weighed down by the years, revealed furniture covered in tattered sheets, dusty chandeliers, and shelves filled with books whose pages creaked when touched. The desk where the document had been kept seemed to have remained untouched for decades, as if silently awaiting someone capable of deciphering its secrets. As she walked through the cold hallways, dimly lit by the weak light filtering through the torn curtains, Lauren felt that every detail of that place was a fragment of a larger story. The manuscript in her hands was not just a record of the past, but an echo of forgotten promises, carried by time like leaves in the wind. Amid the dense silence of the house, one detail caught her attention. Above the sculpted marble fireplace rested an antique pocket watch, its chain wrapped around a rusty nail on the wall. The clock face, covered by slightly cracked glass, displayed a precise time, as if it had stopped at a specific moment many years ago. The delicacy of the hands and the precision of the mechanism indicated that it had once been a valuable piece. The object would not go unnoticed for long. Someone had already been called to restore it. A skilled watchmaker, known in the city for his ability to revive old mechanisms, was about to cross Lauren's path, and with him, new pieces of the mystery would begin to fall into place. Tyler knew Ravennia like the back of his hand. He had grown up among its winding streets and quiet squares, where every building seemed to hold a secret beneath its foundations. His craft, inherited from his grandfather, was more than a profession. It was a meticulous art that required patience, precision, and an almost intuitive understanding of the mechanics of time. In his small workshop, tucked away in a discreet alley behind the central square, he spent hours hunched over magnifying glasses and tweezers, restoring pieces that had long stopped marking the seconds. The request to work at the mansion had come unexpectedly. The piece, an elegantly crafted pocket watch, had been found on the fireplace, forgotten among the dust and the years. Its design suggested a distinguished origin, perhaps a gift from another era, a relic of sentimental value to whoever had once owned it. The silver chain, now dulled by time, was still intact, and the watch face, though cracked, retained a singular elegance. What intrigued him most was that, despite having been still for so long, its hands pointed to a specific time, as if they had frozen at a significant moment. Upon examining the piece in his workshop, Tyler realized it was no ordinary watch. The structure was solid, resistant to time, yet displayed a rare refinement, with intricate details carved into the metal surface, and a polish that, though worn, still reflected silvery glints under the workshop's soft lighting. The internal mechanism was fascinating, with gears arranged in an almost artisanal manner, requiring a level of skill possessed by few watchmakers. The complexity of the piece suggested that it had been custom-made for someone important, possibly a commissioned item produced by highly specialized hands. Running his fingers over the back cover, he noticed a discreet engraving, so fine it was only visible from a specific angle. The inscription seemed more than just a manufacturer's mark. It had something personal about it, almost like a whisper from the past that only the right eyes could decipher. The positioning of the hands, marking a precise hour, combined with the fact that the mechanism had remained frozen for so long, made Tyler feel that the watch had not stopped by mere chance. Every detail hinted at a hidden purpose, a silent enigma buried in the precise millimeter of its gears. The first adjustments required care. The internal gears were covered in a fine layer of oxidation, yet they still maintained a recoverable structure. With each piece removed, a new detail was revealed. Then, as he dismantled the inner cover, he noticed an anomaly. A small side notch indicated the presence of a hidden compartment, a space meticulously calculated to go unnoticed by untrained eyes. With the tip of a fine tool, he slid along the notch until he heard a nearly imperceptible click. A secret compartment opened, revealing a precisely folded piece of paper. The delicate material suggested it had been hidden there for decades, perhaps even centuries. The note was yellowed, but the handwriting, written in ink of an antique shade, was still legible. Tyler unfolded the paper slowly, feeling the fragility of the material between his fingers. At the center, a name. Below it, a date. The writing was firm, but the years had softened the contours of the letters. The meaning of the message was unknown, but the very existence of the hidden note reinforced the feeling that the watch was not just a valuable accessory, it held a story, a secret buried in time. The discovery demanded caution. Restoring the piece was no longer just a routine job. There was something greater at play, something that seemed to be asking to be uncovered. Just like the manuscript Lauren had begun restoring, that small fragment of paper had not been placed there by accident. It was a clue, a link between the present and a past that, in some way, was beginning to resurface. The connection between Lauren and Tyler was not immediate, but was built almost inevitably, guided by the mysteries they were both trying to unravel. At first, their paths crossed by mere coincidence, or so it seemed. The restoration of the manuscript and the investigation of the watch were separate tasks, each requiring a specific type of knowledge and skill. However, as they progressed in their respective work, small details began to emerge, suggesting that the two pieces might be part of the same puzzle. Lauren spent days immersed in the manuscript's worn pages, analyzing every trace of the faded ink, every nuance of the handwriting, every detail of the paper's texture. The structure of the text suggested that it was not a simple account, but something deeper, perhaps a record of events deliberately encoded. Some sentences seemed out of place, as if hiding an alternate meaning beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Tyler dedicated himself to the watch with the same meticulous precision. With each adjustment, each restored piece, the feeling grew that the object was not just an antique artifact. The note found in the hidden compartment raised more questions than answers, and the name inscribed on it seemed to echo something familiar, as if it were linked to Ravennia's past. The discovery of the connection between their two tasks unfolded gradually, as if the mystery itself was revealing itself piece by piece. When Lauren found a passage in the manuscript mentioning a pocket watch tied to a promise made on the Whispering Bridge, the suspicion became impossible to ignore. The passage described an object meant to be kept as a silent witness to a pact sealed long ago. In turn, Tyler realized that the date on the hidden note inside the watch matched an annotation in the manuscript's margins, a seemingly insignificant number that now took on new meaning. What once seemed like isolated coincidences transformed into a web of interconnected clues. As the investigation progressed, their relationship also began to change. What had once been merely a professional interaction turned into an intense collaboration, marked by sleepless nights deciphering hidden patterns and trying to connect scattered fragments of history. Each new discovery brought them closer, not just in their work, but in a more intimate and inexplicable way. There was something about the mysteries they were unraveling that seemed to reflect back on them, as if they were, in some way, part of what they were trying to understand. The mansion by the lake, which had once been just a research setting, became a constant meeting place. It was there that they shared their findings, analyzed the clues, and tried to piece together the puzzle unfolding before them. The silence of the place, interrupted only by the rustling of leaves in the wind and the faint chime of clock pieces being handled, created an almost timeless atmosphere, as if they were caught between different eras. The manuscript and the clock were more than relics of the past. They held stories that still echoed in the present, pulling Lauren and Tyler into a journey that, by that point, had already surpassed the boundaries of what they considered mere work. Something greater was at play, and even without fully understanding its extent, they could no longer ignore the call of the mystery unfolding around them. With each restored page, Lauren delved deeper into the ancient writing of the manuscript. Time had worn away many words, making some passages nearly indecipherable, but her expertise allowed her to reconstruct erased sections, piecing together lost content. The document was filled with enigmatic records, fragments of accounts about promises made on the Whispering Bridge, local legends, and long-forgotten events. However, between the main lines, she began to notice something peculiar. Certain words were slightly misaligned, written in ink that seemed subtly different from the rest of the text. At first, it could have been just a variation in the materials used by the author. But as she analyzed the pattern of the notations, she realized that those displaced words formed hidden sentences when connected. The concealed message was not immediately obvious, but it revealed a parallel narrative, as if someone had recorded a secret without drawing attention to it. The phrases spoke of a pact sealed at nightfall, whispered promises over the lake's waters, and a love destined to be remembered beyond time. While Lauren uncovered this hidden layer within the manuscript, Tyler continued his investigation of the clock. After completely removing the backplate and examining the internal layers of the mechanism, he found a second compartment hidden behind the main structure. Unlike the first note, which contained only a name and a date, this one held a longer text, though still brief and direct. The faded ink indicated that those words had been written long ago, yet the message remained clear. What was promised cannot be undone. Time holds the names of those who dared to love. What unsettled him the most, however, was the signature at the bottom. 2 names, written side by side, that seemed to mirror their own identities. The resemblance was disturbing. It was not just a mere coincidence. The handwriting was not identical, but the sounds and structure of the names were eerily similar, as if there was an echo of the present in the past, a subtle repetition of the story now unfolding before them. When they shared their findings, the connection between the manuscript and the clock became even more evident. The hidden messages in the document spoke of a clock that sealed a pact. The note concealed within the timepiece mentioned an unbreakable commitment. Both objects carried references to promises made on the Whispering Bridge, and somehow, their own lives seemed intertwined with this mystery. There was something unsettling about the idea that their names had already been written in the past, as if they were part of a cycle that repeated throughout time. Every detail pulled them deeper into that hidden narrative, dismantling any notion of mere chance. The story was not just something they studied, it enveloped them irresistibly, as if fate itself was leading them toward an inevitable outcome. As they delved further into their investigation, Lauren and Tyler began to realize that Ravennia held more than just old objects and documents. There was a silent tradition, preserved through generations, that seemed connected to the enigma they were trying to unravel. In historical records, in discreet annotations, and in accounts passed down by the town's elders, one recurring event stood out: the Lantern Ball. The annual celebration marked a night when the town gathered to release lanterns over the lake. The ritual, at first glance merely a poetic custom, concealed a deeper symbolism. Each lantern represented a promise made and upheld over time, some of eternal love, others of long-awaited reunions, and some never revealed, carrying secrets known only to those involved. It was believed that the waters reflected the commitments of those who dared to entrust their feelings to destiny, guiding the souls that, for some reason, had been lost along the way. The oldest records mentioned that the event's origins dated back centuries, tied to the first families who settled along the lake's shores. Among the stories told, some spoke of couples who had sworn unbreakable love on the Whispering Bridge, and of how their names were, in some way, preserved in the town's memory. Over the years, the tradition expanded, becoming an essential part of Ravennia's cycle, a night where the past intertwined with the present, where old promises could be honored and new ones could be made. Beyond its magical atmosphere, the event carried a mystery few dared to discuss. There were reports of lanterns that, instead of drifting with the lake's gentle current, remained motionless on the surface, as if held in place by an unseen force. Others simply extinguished the moment they touched the water, as if the promise they carried had been broken before it was even made. The elders spoke of unexpected encounters during the ball, people who saw familiar faces where there should be none, voices murmuring in the wind, whispers blending into the night soundscape. For Lauren and Tyler, the connection between the lantern ball and the secrets they were uncovering became increasingly evident. The manuscript spoke of eternal promises, the clock bore markings of a pact sealed in time, and now, before them, stood an event that symbolized those very commitments. The past was not just a distant story. It was still alive, echoing in the town's customs, and somehow drawing them deeper into its enigma. This discovery not only reinforced their sense that they were on the right path, but also made it clear that the night of the ball would not be just an ordinary celebration. It would be a moment when time became fluid, when promises made and unfulfilled might find a new chance to be sealed. For them, it would be more than a traditional event. It would be a turning point in the investigation and, possibly, in their own fates. The night of the lantern ball wrapped Ravennia in a golden, ethereal glow. The lanterns rose slowly, reflecting on the lake's calm waters, creating an almost surreal scene. The sound of music, soft and rhythmic, blended with the murmuring wind rustling through the trees and the distant echo of voices celebrating the moment. The air carried the scent of burning candles and fresh flowers scattered along the dock, while the townspeople danced beneath the flickering light that painted delicate shadows on the stone pavement. Lauren and Tyler moved through the guests, absorbing the atmosphere of the event. Everything seemed carefully orchestrated to evoke a sense of nostalgia and devotion to the past. The lanterns ascended in delicate harmony, reflecting on the lake's surface like scattered miniature suns, while people whispered wishes and promises to the wind. The air was infused with a sweet fragrance, mixing the scent of flowers spread across the hall with the faint trace of melted wax from the lit candles. Every step they took through the ballroom felt laden with hidden meaning, as if they were following a path traced by unseen hands long before they arrived in town. The music flowed in soft waves, filling the space with an ancient melody, resonating as if it belonged to a distant era. The exchanged glances between the couples around them carried something beyond mere joy for the celebration. There was a silent reverence, as if each dance was an act of devotion to something greater. At the center of the square, where the pairs glided in measured movements, Lauren and Tyler felt the undeniable force of that moment. There was no formal invitation or exchanged words. They simply found each other in the midst of the dance, guided by something that transcended logic. Their bodies moved in sync, their steps adjusting with instinctive precision, as if they had done this before, in a time long forgotten. The touch was light, but charged with tension, their fingers intertwined with calculated softness, while the warmth radiating between them created a contrast against the night's creeping chill that seeped into the open hall. Each turn revealed new angles of the lantern's reflections on their skin, tinting them in golden and amber hues, as if they were characters from an ancient painting, captured in a fleeting moment of beauty. Time seemed to slow, the beats of the music echoing in sync with their hearts. Their eyes met, holding a gaze that spoke more than any words ever could. There was something magnetic in that instant, a pull that pushed them toward the inevitability of a more intimate touch. Their faces drew closer, their movements slowed, and for a second, the world around them vanished. All that existed was the shared warmth between them, their breaths blending into the soft night breeze, the latent desire growing with each heartbeat. But at the last moment, Lauren hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her eyes before she slightly turned away, interrupting the gesture before it could fully form. The tension remained, an invisible thread stretched to its limit, on the verge of snapping. It wasn't just hesitation or uncertainty. It was the suffocating sensation that this had happened before, that they were reliving something they didn't fully understand. The touch that had once been comforting now seemed laden with hidden meanings. The dance continued, but the lightness had dissipated. That fleeting, almost realized moment lingered between them like an unfinished promise, a story eager to repeat itself, yet still shrouded in mystery. A gentle night breeze carried the lanterns across the lake's calm surface, turning the water's mirror into a mosaic of floating lights. The trembling glow reflected in soft waves, dancing in hypnotic patterns that seemed to follow a rhythm of their own, guided by an invisible flow. The murmurs of the guests still echoed in the background, but the world around Lauren and Tyler seemed to shrink into the moment they shared, into the space they occupied together by the lake's edge. Then, one of the lanterns, in an unexpected movement, drifted away from the others, straying from its natural path. Instead of continuing its silent journey through the sky, it descended gently until it touched the water, floating in solitary brilliance near the shore where they stood. Its wavering reflection cast irregular shadows upon the wet stones, as if the lake itself were whispering forgotten secrets. The flame inside the lantern flickered, revealing an inscription delicately etched into the fragile paper structure. The letters emerged as the translucent fabric expanded and contracted with the subtle movement of the breeze. The names, arranged with near ceremonial precision, were unmistakable. The same words Lauren had read in the manuscript, the same signatures hidden in the clock restored by Tyler. An old date accompanied the inscription, a remnant of something that seemed to transcend time and space. The night, once wrapped in an atmosphere of enchantment, took on a new weight, almost spectral. The glow of the surrounding lanterns felt more distant, as if that single object carried a presence of its own, a silent link between past and present. The damp wood beneath their feet, the cold wind they had barely noticed before, the sound of water touching the stones. Everything became more vivid, more intense. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a lost fragment of the festival, a tribute to chance. That lantern was there for a reason, as if something greater was orchestrating every small detail of that night. The moment enveloped them like a veil of uncertainty, intertwining their existences with the promise of a mystery yet to be unraveled. The lantern floated gently on the lake's surface, and the reflection of their names inscribed on the paper stared back at them like an omen. The flickering glow of the flame cast faint shadows across the dark waters, as if time itself were watching them. The world around them felt distant, as if everything had narrowed down to that moment of revelation. The connection between their previous discoveries and this instant became impossible to ignore. The night, which had once seemed merely a backdrop for a traditional festivity, took on a different weight, a silent urgency. Every detail, the signature on the manuscript, the hidden note in the clock, the inscription on the lantern, was a fragment of something larger, a puzzle beginning to take shape. It was no longer about coincidences or a simple historical mystery. There was a pattern, an invisible thread linking their existences to something that seemed to transcend time. Lauren and Tyler's steps grew hesitant. The ground beneath them felt less firm, as if reality itself were adjusting to a new order, shaped by the pieces of this enigma. The wind that had once been a gentle breeze now seemed to carry a weight, a nearly imperceptible whisper among the leaves of the trees. The celebration continued, but the laughter of the guests faded into indistinct murmurs, muffled by the revelation hanging between them. The investigation, which had once been driven by professional curiosity, now took on a personal nature. They were no longer merely studying the past of Ravennia. They themselves were part of the history they were trying to uncover. The ancient records did not just speak of distant figures. They mentioned their very names, as if the events described had been set in motion long before they were born. The weight of that discovery consumed them completely. What had once seemed like a mystery to be solved now felt like a calling, an inevitable connection to something unknown. The answers they sought were not just in the aged paper or the rusted gears of time. They were within them, in the paths they unknowingly followed, in the choices that led them to each new revelation. The night moved forward, but the sensation that something far greater was at play only intensified. The investigation was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about understanding the role they played in the fate that, in some way, had been waiting for them. The Whispering Bridge had stood over Ravennia's serene waters for centuries, veiled in mist and secrets carried by the wind. Its stone structure, weathered by time, bore the marks of countless generations who had passed through, leaving behind promises, hopes, and sometimes destinies sealed by unseen forces. It was not just a bridge, but a symbol, a point of convergence between the present and the past, between loves that blossomed and stories that repeated themselves. The legend surrounding the bridge was well known among the town's inhabitants. It was said that couples who met there and made a vow under the moonlight would have their fates intertwined forever. For some, it meant an unbreakable bond, a love that would transcend the barriers of time and withstand life's trials. For others, it meant tragedy, a connection that could not be severed, even through pain and separation. There was no middle ground, no escape. What was promised on the Whispering Bridge became part of the very fabric of destiny. The elders whispered stories of lovers who, once bound by the vow, could never part, even when the world conspired against them. There were tales of couples who defied all odds and remained together despite every adversity. But there were also those whose stories had been marked by dark endings, tragedies that seemed written long before their protagonists were even aware of their own existence. The air around the bridge carried a nearly tangible aura of melancholy and mystery. Some said that if one listened closely enough, they could hear the whispers of those who had passed through, distant echoes of love vows or laments of broken hearts. Some believed the bridge was not merely a place of promises, but a portal to something greater, a link between souls destined to find each other again and again, throughout time. The connection between the legend and recent events became undeniable. The names in the manuscript, the hidden message in the clock, the inscription on the lantern, everything seemed to revolve around that bridge and the promises made there. If Lauren and Tyler were being guided to that place, it was no accident. The past was calling them, and fate was pushing them inexorably toward a choice that might have already been made long before they arrived in Ravennia. The investigation, which had once seemed like a journey into the past, began to transform into something darker. Small events, initially easy to dismiss as mere coincidences, piled up, forming an unsettling pattern. The manuscript that Lauren was restoring, so carefully examined, began to show inexplicable gaps. Entire pages that had been intact before now vanished without a trace, compromising crucial parts of the narrative hidden in that document. There were no signs of forced entry or invasion in the space where she worked, yet the essential material for the research disappeared as if it had never been there. In Tyler's workshop, the problems manifested in equally mysterious ways. The old clock, which he had disassembled with surgical precision, suffered inexplicable damage. Parts that had been perfectly preserved now showed subtle cracks, just enough to compromise the mechanism. Some, which he remembered placing on his workbench before finishing his work, simply weren't there the next morning. With each new attempt at repair, new obstacles appeared, as if something or someone was deliberately sabotaging his efforts. There were no logical explanations. The couple began to realize they were not alone in this search. The mystery was not limited to ancient objects and forgotten secrets. There was an active, invisible force determined to prevent them from reaching the truth. The feeling of being watched became constant, and every shadow cast by the faint lighting of Ravennia's narrow streets seemed to conceal unknown intentions. Fear had not yet overtaken them, but unease grew. This game of missing pieces and stolen pages was not the result of chance. Someone was manipulating events, anticipating their steps, erasing clues before they could fully comprehend them. The past did not want to be uncovered, or someone in the present was willing to do anything to keep it buried. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Every clue found during the investigation pointed to an inevitable conclusion. The manuscript restored by Lauren, now almost complete, revealed a story that had been repeating itself for centuries, always involving two names that somehow resonated through time. Tyler's clock, even sabotaged, hid within its mechanics a message that guided them to the Whispering Bridge. It was not just a legend told by the people of Ravennia. It was a cycle, an intertwined fate that seemed to drag them toward its conclusion. The decision they had to make went beyond logic. It was not just a matter of believing or not in the stories of the past, but of accepting that they were living within them. If they crossed the bridge and made a promise, they would be sealing their destinies forever, just as the names engraved in the pages of the manuscript and on the lantern by the lake had done before. But what if the cycle was not just an act of love, but a burden that would condemn them? The doubt weighed heavily on them. The wind was blowing hard that night, causing the trees around them to whisper like distant voices. The lake reflected the light of the moon, making the scene even more ethereal. The clock in the manor, silent for so long, seemed to be waiting for the right moment to announce its verdict. If they turned back, they could try to ignore the call of destiny, follow separate paths, and pretend that none of this had affected them. But something within them already knew it wasn't that simple. The connection that had brought them here would not disappear with their refusal. The past had found them, and now it was up to them to decide whether they would accept their role in the story or try to escape something that might be inescapable. The seconds stretched out. Everything was leading them to this moment. The bridge awaited them. The promise had to be made, and fate, like a clock about to strike its final chime, was waiting for their choice. The fog hung over Ravennia like an ethereal veil, transforming the landscape into a scene of blurred shadows and wavering silhouettes. The bridge, shrouded in thick mist, seemed like a portal between two worlds, the past and the present, the known and the uncertain. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves on the shores of the lake and the gentle sound of water touching the old wood of the structure. Lauren moved forward with hesitant steps, feeling the damp cold of the early morning wrap around her skin. Every detail around her seemed charged with silent symbolism. The faint glow of distant lanterns cast elongated shadows, and the wood beneath her feet creaked softly, as if echoing ancient stories not yet forgotten. Tyler was already there, waiting. The mist enveloped him in an almost unreal way, partially obscuring his features, but his presence was unmistakable. He stood still, gazing at the bridge as though he could see beyond the visible. Something there seemed alive, pulsing with a meaning greater than either of them could comprehend. The whispering bridge carried the weight of countless promises made over the centuries. Couples had crossed that same path, swearing eternal love, and some had disappeared without a trace, lost in stories told in whispers by the oldest villagers. The legend said that those who promised under that mist would never part, but the exact fate of each couple varied between beauty and tragedy. Now, Lauren and Tyler were there, guided by invisible forces, connected by fragments of a past that refused to remain buried. Everything had led them to this moment. The promise they would make was not just a whim or a symbolic gesture. It was a link to something much greater, a cycle that could either close or repeat once more. The night seemed suspended in time. The air carried a chill that came not only from the weather, but from something hovering around them, like an invisible presence, attentive to what was about to happen. Fate was waiting for their decision. The air around them seemed to vibrate, as if the very night contained a silent expectation. The thick mist gently undulated over the bridge, enveloping them in a spectral veil. Time seemed suspended, holding its breath in anticipation of the moment unfolding. Lauren and Tyler, united there, felt that every invisible thread of their destinies converged at that exact point in the timeline. With their fingers intertwined, their voices sounded low, almost whispered, as they spoke the words that would seal the bond between them. The promise made was not just a commitment between two souls, but a call to the past, a gesture toward the unknown, an echo of the forgotten vows that had lingered over Ravennia for so many years. As soon as the words were spoken, the absolute silence was broken. From the depths of the night, a deep sound cut through the air. The tolling of the clock in the manor resonated through the valley, its dark melody echoing through the trees and over the waters of the lake. There was no reason for that mechanism, which had been still for decades, to begin working again. Yet, there it was, marking the passage of a time that could not be measured in mere minutes and hours. Each chime was a reminder of something larger than themselves, as if the manor held its own consciousness and was witnessing the fulfillment of a destiny long written. The chime resonated like a seal, a confirmation that the cycle was closing, that the choice had been made, and that there would be no turning back. The mist seemed to dissipate slightly, as if an invisible weight was lifted from the air. The shadows of the past did not disappear completely, but settled in the darkness, watching from afar, satisfied with the outcome unfolding before them. Something had changed. Something had been restored. And even though reason tried to seek logical explanations, the truth was undeniable. The clock had not just marked time, it had sealed a destiny. The silence that followed the last chime of the clock was almost deafening. The mist, once thick and unsettling, seemed to retreat slowly, dissolving into the cold breeze of the early morning. The invisible weight that had hovered over them for so long began to dissipate, as if a hidden force, which had tested them to the limit, had finally received its answer. Lauren and Tyler looked at each other, and for the first time since everything began, fear was no longer the dominant emotion. Something had transformed. The danger that had surrounded them had not been merely a physical threat or a manifestation of the unknown. It had led them to a greater understanding, to a truth that had always been there, silent, waiting to be recognized. The objects that had guided the investigation, the manuscript, the clock, the hidden messages, were fragments of a much deeper puzzle. They were not just pieces of an ancient mystery, but mirrors of the emotional journey they had traveled. Each obstacle, each revelation, and each doubt had led them to that moment, to that promise made on the Whispering Bridge. The city of Ravennia had always been surrounded by tales of loves intertwined by fate, of promises that withstood time, and of bonds that could not be broken. What Lauren and Tyler had experienced was not just a chance occurrence or a strange coincidence. The true mystery had never been in the relics of the past, but in the feeling that grew between them, shaped by the inevitable. tested by uncertainty, and, in the end, confirmed by the choice they had made. The darkness of the night no longer seemed as dense. The wind that had once whispered warnings now sounded like a whisper of acceptance. And as they stood there, on the bridge that had witnessed so many vows over the centuries, they finally understood that everything they had faced had not driven them away from the truth. It had only guided them to it. The manuscript, now completely restored, rested on Lauren's desk, its pages worn by time finally reconstructed, revealing its content in all its fullness. Each line translated a fragment of a story that had passed through generations, and as they reached the end, the last sentence glowed with a silent strength. True love is never forgotten. The words, once hidden by the wear and flaws of the parchment, were now clear, as if they had always been waiting to be read at that exact moment. The weight of the message resonated in everything they had lived. It was not just a conclusion, but a confirmation of the journey that had led them there, crossing the veil of the unknown, confronting the past, and discovering a connection that defied time. Beside the manuscript, the old clock rested on Tyler's workbench. The meticulously restored mechanism now pulsed with a perfect cadence, marking time uninterrupted, as if it had finally found its purpose. The promise made on the Whispering Bridge was not just an echo of the past. It was a conscious decision to accept what fate had presented to them. The bond between them, once shrouded in mystery and uncertainty, now solidified as an undeniable truth. What they had discovered was not just a lost story in a manuscript or an enigma engraved inside a clock. It was a cycle that repeated itself, a feeling that transcended logic and the barriers of time. Ravennia, with its secrets, its legends, and its persistent mist, had once again witnessed an intertwined destiny, the past and the present united, and as the night enveloped the city in its silent cloak, Lauren and Tyler sealed their commitment, knowing that their lives were irrevocably linked. The clock marked a new time, not of uncertainties, but of a shared future. And the words of the manuscript echoed in the silence of the early morning, eternal, immortal, like the promise they had made. True love is never forgotten.